The philosopher Alan Watts, in describing an anecdote of Zen Buddhism, related the quote, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." A simple philosophy, and one which, in many ways, appeals to modern minds as a return to simplicity away from the encumbrance of technology. Of course, it is the trappings of technology which, in fact, do trap us in a framework which restricts us from fulfilling this way of living. And since it is integral to our way of life, it would be very difficult, as we currently stand, to have the one without the other. That is, to be able to maintain our technological status, our interconnected world, and yet be free of the encumbrances and demands created by this system. But taking away the one in order to gain the other would not be such a benefit, no matter how appealing the simpler lifestyle may seem. And there are some who choose to go, as I say, off-grid in an attempt to live this out, some successfully, some unsuccessfully. Others attempt to do it partially. Many people simply try to use their vacation time to fulfill a microcosm of this. But if we think of human happiness to be in some way reflected in that saying, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep," the simple fulfillment of our needs. How often we go through our days struggling to keep ourselves from eating when we are not hungry because we are tempted by food, or to eat when we don't feel like eating because it is the time to eat, perhaps the only time we have available to eat. We make ourselves sleep sometimes when we don't want to, and we certainly make ourselves get up when we don't want to. That is not solely the cause of modern life. Sociologists and anthropologists tell us humans have been sleeping badly for a very long time. But it is certainly exacerbated and, to some degree, cemented by modern life and the technology which is part and parcel of modern life. So, if we wish to get ourselves to a place where we can use technology as leverage to gain a more, in some degree, naturalistic or at least simplistically healthy lifestyle, rather than holding us back from that lifestyle, how do we achieve that? The aspects of technology which most significantly would allow us to go in this direction are also some of the slowest to change. All the more so because they tend to be wrapped up in cultural artifacts and cultural realities. For instance, asynchronous work, which we have discussed before, is enabled in many ways by modern technology. We have the ability to do our work in our own homes or in other places without the need of directly interfacing with others. Documents are easy to find without others' help. Communication is possible not only at all hours of the day, depending on whom and where you're trying to contact, but also information can be asynchronously communicated or stored and then retrieved. The communication process does not have to happen slowly or in real time. There are other ways to conduct that. And so it is much, much easier for workers in all kinds of work to be able to carry out their functions when it best suits their needs. And this is pretty critical to the more natural and, let's say, flexible lifestyle. Not being held to somebody else's rhythms, somebody else's schedule is a gate to being able to live by your own schedule. But there are certain harsh realities that sometimes you do need to interface one-on-one, and sometimes real time is needed. And at that point, making communication happen requires syncing between schedules, requires sometimes adapting to somebody else's needs, somebody else's times. And even when it is not strictly necessary, we put ourselves in an environment of work and the work day whose structure allows us to be productive, at least en masse, because we have not yet learned sometimes how to be productive in that way alone. And so the culture surrounding this productivity takes the real need, the real occasional need of scheduling and synchronous work, and expands on it until it is much more perhaps than it needs to be, and leads us to a certain different lifestyle. One that is much more synchronous, much more stable, but which may not be the best for us, for our intrinsic physical, biological rhythms. Changing that is more than simply changing technology. Certainly, the better that technology works, the more easy it is to communicate, the fewer failures that are seen, the more so it will be easily accepted. When it's obvious that there will not be a hit taken by productivity, a hit taken by earnings, then it becomes much more palatable. We inch ever closer to this, but it's not without setbacks. And really, it requires a full turnover of generations, at least one if not more, in order to gain a kind of intuitive acceptance. And we're currently in a state where some workplaces, some industries, some individuals are much more accepting of this than others. Some, realistically, are just much more applicable for this than others. But it's also easy to lean upon that lack of adaptability, lack of fit of an industry, of a workplace, as an excuse to not make the attempt. And that is the area where an individual, over time, can make the most impact, not necessarily by creating some new tool or some method of communication or devising a protocol that makes it easier for workers to make asynchronous or flexible work happen in their environment, but rather by making it obvious as possible, that success can be achieved, that small changes do not need to be painful, but may in fact benefit, and that for a given person, taking the time and the effort to make the changes and make the investment of being productive in a new and different way will, before long, have a significant return on investment for their own personal well-being and happiness. It is not an easy thing to do, especially when someone has found their alternative rhythm, let's call it, the rhythm that they have found in concert with their work environment, which may not be their most natural rhythm, but they have come to accept it and work with it, and it feels to them almost like their natural rhythm. They only discover that it's not when they dig deep or, let's just say, take a vacation and have trouble adapting back. There's also an element of the personal in how technology restrains us from living a more biologically compatible lifestyle. We get in our own way in how we live our lives. There are the more obvious ways, such as lying in bed at night with your phone, scrolling through some feed, and therefore not falling asleep even when your body is giving you cues to fall asleep. These can be changed with difficulty, but simply by a slow change of habit. More difficult to change, and sometimes to identify, is the way we build our environment around us. How we structure our day, even when work is not a factor, working against our circadian cycle, using technology as a stopgap rather than as a solution. For instance, by using Uber Eats to get the fastest, closest food when you feel hungry, rather than using some tool that can help you figure out what the best, most filling food would be for you at that time, and then determining how to get it. Of course, that takes more effort and feels less rewarding. And most companies and organizations are incentivized naturally to cater to the former case rather than the latter case. We see some changes already in terms of meal kits, Amazon Fresh, things like that. But these are small, slow changes, and they have to work in concert with your own decisions, your own changes. And this sort of thing is a much more difficult change to overcome personally. It's not just changing a habit, it's changing how you interact with your environment and with your life via technology. All this technology gives us the latitude, the freedom to build our lives in a way that would profit our physical and mental well-being, but we have to be able to think through how to get there, and we have to have the tools available not only to make it happen, but to realize what we really need. It's not just how can I get food, it's how can I figure out what food to get. It's not how can I fall asleep, it's why am I not falling asleep, and thereby discovering what is missing. And the technology is there to do these things, if much of it is still nascent. But we have to work on our idiomatic internal culture, so to speak, of how we live our lives. And taking this internal culture and pairing it together with the external culture and making these changes slowly, bit by bit, but determinedly, we can absolutely get ourselves to the point where, when hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. And if you've ever experienced a day, a week, a month of what that feels like to accomplish, you know that the effort is well worth it. If you can get yourself there, it's much easier to stay there than it is to leave. Once you've achieved that kind of internal harmony, you will never want to look back. And technology does not inhibit us or prohibit us from getting there, but it is our responsibility and our goal to make our technology work for us, to help synchronize with our actual needs, identify our actual needs, and build a framework, a lifestyle, where technology is an enabler of physiological success.